Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Sarah Dorr. I am the Director of Professional Development at the International Studies Association. For those of you who may not be familiar with the International Studies Association, it is the largest association dedicated to understanding transnational and global affairs, and it is currently based in global affairs at the University of Connecticut. So today we are here for a conversation with the Undersecretary General Melissa Fleming for strengthening information integrity in the humanitarian context. So without further delay, I am going to turn it over to ISA's Executive Director, Mike Bozia, who's going to proceed with the introductions. Mike?
Thank you. Thank you to the team at UNAI, to our UNAI committee at the International Studies Association, and to Dr. Sarah Dorr, our Director of Professional Development, for all your efforts in coordinating this unique and timely forum. And thank you to everyone for attending. We are living in a troubled world. I'm sure we gather today because we understand just how troubled the development and advancement of knowledge are, and we hope for a better understanding of how we might contribute to information integrity when much of what we do rests on unstable footings. We have seen societies with free institutions for research and instruction now restrict access to resources, and societies where freedom is restricted politicize and further constrain research and study. When resources are available for scholarship teaching, an emphasis on natural sciences, math, engineering, and professional fields has resulted in less institutional support for research and teaching in the social sciences and humanities that directly address our ability to understand and maneuver in the social world as ethical human beings. New sources of information competition have emerged, ungoverned by the norms and ethical practices expected of print and broadcast journalists, or the scholarly standards that shape our research and teaching output. Technology has amplified the space for and impact of ungoverned information on all of our lives. Few of us at this webinar today are free from the temptation of social media. Indeed, some engagement on platforms has become professional expectation, even as we recognize that these same platforms are dangerous, addictive, and socially disadvantageous. So I ask, are we truly free from the powerful platforms that strip information from its normative foundations and share data equally, whether true or false? My answer to this is we should be. Today, we will consider the principles the UN has developed and how we might apply them in our world, both professional or public, as well as private. With this in mind, I call our attention to a vision of academia grounded in human development, a reminder that provides the foundation for our work at ISA. We might think of the origins of scholarly principles in the past, including building from and preserving knowledges, in locations like the School of Shenzhen, for example, or in the yeshiva, madrasa, or abbey. In those contexts, the work of scholarship was embedded in a collective commitment to improving the individual and improving human society through an elaboration and refinement of social and normative principles. Often, the world in which these schools existed was unstable and the future uncertain. The Warring State period in China, the Dark Ages in Europe, the Crusades, and the colonial occupation of Arab and Muslim societies. Those who preserved and advanced knowledge faced steep challenges: superstition, widespread illiteracy, violence. Yet, based in critical observations of the world and reflections on antecedent scholarship, such processes provided a source of inspiration for our work at ISA, in academia in general, that supports and advances knowledge of the human condition. We should be careful, though, not to take too much from this analogy. In the face of information overload and the prominence of conspiracy over fact, it might be tempting for us to retreat to our protective enclaves, or to teach only those who want to hear. Isolation is no solution. In calling to mind the role of learning in the past, I intend the opposite. Our job is to insist on the integrity of the work we do, to reflect the best standards for knowledge acquisition and human development, and to contribute our collective and generative capacity to the advancement of knowledge over deceit. In the forum ahead, Punam Yadav, Associate Professor in the Department of Risk and Disaster Reduction at University College London and Chair of the ISA-UNAI Committee, will lead us in a dialogue with UN Undersecretary General for Global Communications, Melissa Fleming. By way of introducing the Undersecretary General, I would like to share a quote from her. While it is our duty to highlight what is wrong with the world, we also have an opportunity to point out what is going right, what is possible, and how the United Nations is making a difference. Unquote. Now I will turn the forum over to Dr. Yadav and the Undersecretary General. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for the opening remarks as well as for the introduction. Before we begin with the conversation, just a quick note on housekeeping. So we'll start with some main questions, and that will be for 25 minutes. And then once that concludes, we will open it up for Q&A. We kindly ask you to use the Q&A box to submit your questions. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. We'll do our best to address as many questions as possible. However, due to time limitations, we might not be able to respond to all of the questions. Therefore, thank you so much in advance for your understanding and participation. So now we'll begin with our conversation. Thank you, USC, for your time today. And I have a couple of questions to begin with. And then, as I said earlier, we can open it up then for questions from the audience. So my first question to you is regarding your personal experiences and perspectives on the information ecosystem. So your extensive experience in communications as the current USC for global communications and through your work with the UN Refugee Agency positions you uniquely to provide insights into today's information ecosystem. So we would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on the current dynamics of the information ecosystem, including the biggest threats and their influence in the humanitarian work of the UN and NGO partners. So over to you, Ms. Fleming.
Thank you very much, Punam, and please call me Melissa. And hello, everyone. And it's great to be here. I'm speaking to you from UN headquarters in New York. And, I've been communicating on behalf of the UN and international organizations for my whole career. And it has always been challenging to get people's attention, to get information out, to get the facts into people's minds. But I have never been in an information environment like this and been so challenged. I mean, Mike said that we're in an online information ecosystem where facts are shared equally, whether true or false. Actually, it's worse than that. There was, I think it was in 2019, there was a study by MIT which found that lies travel 6 times faster than facts. And I think in the years that have followed, it's gotten even worse as platforms have either wholly removed, fired their trust and safety teams or vastly reduced them. So as researchers and academics, I think you will be very aware also, and I think Mike outlined this very well at the beginning, that the advancement of knowledge is being challenged by conspiracy theories, by attacks on science, by the questioning of the validity of academia at all. So, I mean, these are just fundamental risks. And when you look at in what state our public is in, our starting point is that people don't have a shared basis of facts. It used to be that at least, the kind of fundamental facts for the majority of the population were the starting point. But now the information ecosystem is so fragmented and so so, full of mis and disinformation and hate speech that it is very difficult to navigate. We are absolutely seeing these effects globally on all areas and all pillars of our work. I know today we're speaking specifically about the effects on humanitarian. I assume that also means on vulnerable people and vulnerable groups around the world. We, in my role, leading global communications, and the quote that Mike used also to introduce me is kind of what we live by. On one hand, we have to be very cognizant of our information environment, what is being said about the issues that we're trying to advance and promote, what attacks are being slung at the UN and humanitarian actors who are working to improve people's lives. But at the same time, how can we get into those information spaces? And I think also, Mike said, we cannot, there is no solution in isolation. There is no solution in retreat, because we are really in an information and war. We're in a war over the narrative. And if we cannot cede the territory when we are speaking about really important issues for people's lives to those who are profiting off of deceit or disinformation, we need to, advance the facts. So it is harder. I don't think I've been in a more challenging information environment in my entire career. On the other hand, we do have the same opportunities as the actors who are putting out deceitful information and conspiracy theories. We also have the opportunities on those same platforms to provide people with information, with inspiration, with ways to get involved. And that's the way our communication strategy works. And I can get into that in a little more detail as we go through the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So my follow-up question is that how are the UN how are the UN humanitarian agencies addressing the challenges to information integrity in their operations now? And what impacts those challenges have on the broader effectiveness and trust in the global humanitarian aid efforts?
Yeah, well, it is really hard. I mean, I used to work for the UN Refugee Agency for 10 years. And I remember I was working at UNHCR when social media started really becoming the top way to communicate with the public. And I was actually very excited about it because my traditional way of communicating with people was through journalists. And we continued to do that. And through public speaking, but now we had a way to reach people directly and to engage with people directly. But I soon saw the dark side, and especially with refugees and migrants being instrumentalized and weaponized for political means, turning people against them, creating fear where there should have been none. And exploiting this in people's social media feeds. So we have been, working against this for some time, working through behavioral science, looking at how people respond to mass suffering, large numbers of people on the move, and developing communications that is humanizing. Using individual stories and trying to get those kinds of human and very, very compelling and very moving accounts of why people flee war and persecution, and the fundamental goodness of people and countries that take refugees in. that works, and we have lots of evidence that that kind of communication works. Even some that we didn't plan that everybody uses as kind of a case. I think you'll all remember when the little boy Aylan Kurdi was washed up on the shore of a beach, and the image of him lying on the ground, and everybody seeing him as the kind of son that probably the image of your own son or your own grandchild or your own nephew, or the outpouring of support for refugees that came following that image. And we have a lot of evidence, including in a book I wrote about a young Syrian refugee who survived one of the worst shipwrecks on the Mediterranean Sea and managed to save a little girl, even though 500 fellow refugees died, drowned around her over the 4 days and 4 nights she was in the water. That story inspired so much support for Syrian refugees, but also so much interest in what were the circumstances that forced her to flee, forced her to take one of those smuggling routes, one of those boats. So again, we have formulas, but it's tough. And what we're seeing now is a lot of danger to humanitarians in their field of operation. It is the deadliest time in living memory to be a humanitarian. So this is, on one hand, we have the populations we're trying to serve, and we're trying to communicate to humanize them. On the other hand, in the social media age, humanitarians are vulnerable to attack and to distortion of what their intentions are. Most of them are, in Gaza, in Sudan, risking their lives trying to help others. But in 2024, it was the deadliest year on record to be a humanitarian. There were 377 deaths across 20 countries. I can't say that there was, a direct link between those deaths and how those humanitarians were being depicted. But what we do know is that the information environment is contributing to them being less safe. We have a similar situation with UN peacekeepers, where they are being accused of all kinds of things on social media that are untrue. And this is resulting in populations rising up against them, accusing them of things, and them being scapegoated for things that are happening in the population. So this kind of mis and disinformation is really, in fragile and in war-torn environments, it's making it harder to be a humanitarian. And yeah, it's very, very tough to continue it. And just a final point there, it is also making it tougher for us to defend our work, as we are facing massive funding cuts. So this challenge of, kind of convenient reputational attacks that come through on social media at organizations like UNRWA or at organizations like UNHCR is making it harder for us to maintain our reputations, our images, and in turn, our funding support.
Thank you so much. And being a teacher who teaches humanitarian studies, I have a lot of questions. And also your point about 2024 being a deadliest year for humanitarian workers is so powerful and has a lot of messages for us. So thank you so much. I'll move on with my another question. And if there is more time, then we will definitely come back to some of the questions I have and the audience may have as well. So my next question to you is that what are the measures being implemented to ensure accurate, transparent, and reliable dissemination of critical information to support UN humanitarian agencies in their efforts to ensure effective and equitable aid delivery? Could you elaborate on the core vision behind the UN Global Principles for Information Integrity and their intended impact to deliver choice, freedom, privacy, and safety for all?
Yes, well, I would thank you very much for that question. And just to say that I mentioned just earlier that some of our communications response to threats to information integrity that are connected to our work. Something that we also did was, and this was in response not just to the information environment that we were experiencing, but also to civil society, researchers, media, who were crying out for some kind of global guidance on how to respond to threats on information integrity. So we this was after COVID, where we saw the height of conspiracy theories and disinformation about vaccines and just spread across the world. And so we decided to consult very widely researchers, academics, policymakers, also in the private sector, and realized that there was a growing global movement that was advocating for a more humane internet. And we put together this global, the United Nations Global Principles for Information Integrity, following these global consultations. And it is a set of recommendations for a healthy information ecosystem. We didn't just look at digital platforms because they are, of course, hugely part of the problem. They can be part of the solution, but we haven't really made much headway in asking digital platforms to change. They are also not the only contributors to a healthy information environment. So the recommendations are also directed at governments, at AI developers, at advertisers, and with the essential kind of core, which is to uphold human rights, and also it does address freedom of expression, which is being questioned or a lot, and the freedom of expression meaning the right of everyone to seek information and also to express themselves. So this vision really settles around a core call to action. Let us not settle for an internet that harms us, really. And let's demand one that is designed for humans, an internet where users are empowered to set the terms, where users also can make informed decisions and express themselves freely. And that's key, where users can express themselves freely, because what we are seeing are lots of attacks on vulnerable people. And an internet where the most reliable and accurate information is the most accessible, and where people can access a range of views and express themselves freely without attack. So this is the global principles are online. Also, during the General Assembly in September, member states, the 193 member states of the United Nations, developed a global digital compact, which is a historic agreement that looks at the whole digital environment, but does have a section that's very relevant on information integrity that is important to look at. I'll leave it at that and move back to you, Punam.
Thank you so much. So this is available online, and if you want to learn more about the global principles, we can just search and then find the document and go through it. There are lots of recommendations also for different kinds of groups, including academics and civil society as well. So we may find that very, very useful in our own work. Thank you so much. So another question for you is about the United Nations 3R approach. So how does the UN's 3R approach, that is research, risk assessment, and response, contribute to strengthening information integrity in support of the UN's operational mandates and thematic priorities? And how can researchers like us, especially those engaged in humanitarian and peace-building efforts, integrate these principles into their own work?
Yeah, no, I think this is something that sounds simple. The 3 R's of the UN Global Communications work, which is, research, rate, risk, and respond. And the research part is so vital. This information ecosystem has fostered an incredible group of researchers around the world, academics, as well as NGOs, civil society, and journalists who are all working to study the effects of the information ecosystem on societies. One of their biggest problems has been access and to the data from the platforms. In Europe, there is the Digital Services Act that is requiring the platforms to provide researchers with this data. The UN has access to some of it. For our own communications purposes, we have a small research team, and everyone in most UN organizations, there's also a small information integrity team that is studying depending on what we're working on, for example, around climate or around a specific situation, like, for example, the Israel-Gaza war, or just the United Nations, and looking at narratives and critical narratives around our work, both positive and negative. If we're finding that there is a risk through this research to our ability to carry out our work, we rate the risk, because very often we have people from around the world calling us and saying, "Oh my God, did you see this post on X? It is saying this, and we're worried, and we think it's going viral, and can you call?" and trying to get them to do something, and Sometimes it really doesn't even warrant a response. Sometimes it is circulating within a small fragmented bubble. Sometimes a response might be even detrimental. It might further the rumor or the lie or the conspiracy, but sometimes it does. And this is the job of figuring out how much of a risk this narrative is posing. It might be one that we just study, and then we formulate a response. We do have quite a robust communications team here that is, constantly creating content, developing messages, putting out factual information and reports. Once we know where false information or critical narratives are traveling and the effect that they're having and who they're potentially reaching, we can then put out our own information into those spaces. We also work with influencers and trusted messengers who in many contexts are actually much more powerful messengers than when people receive the information directly from an institution like the United Nations. So this is the way we work. It's easy. Again, it's a formula that makes a lot of sense. It does require capacity, but otherwise we would just be communicating into the dark. We need to communicate strategically and directed at audiences who maybe are getting swayed by information that is false.
Thank you so much. And that brings me to my final question. And this is about, again, those marginalized voices and communities. So my question to you is, how do the global principles on information integrity address the difficulties presented by structural biases for emerging and or marginalized voices among researchers, policymakers, and global advocates, including women, sexual and gender minorities, and those from the global south.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, social media has a lot of promise for marginalized groups. And many do say, on one hand, they have been able to access community in ways that they never could have before across the globe. And they were shut out of global conversations for so long. And so, again, it is a huge opportunity. But they also are very exposed in these conversations when they put themselves out there. We see marginalized groups disproportionately under attack. We see, I don't even know who to call a marginalized group, because I would be a marginalized group, because women, especially women who put themselves out there as journalists, as activists, as climate advocates, are very often women politicians, disproportionately attacked online. Members of the LGBTQI plus community, very much so. So in our recommendations in the global principles, we explicitly call for responses to take into account the needs and experiences of individuals and groups in marginalized and vulnerable situations. This also includes, I mentioned women, but also children, young people. I mean, I can't say enough how vulnerable young people are to online harms. And I think you all know the many dimensions, and you teach young people. There are also older persons who are very susceptible, persons with disabilities, but also billions of people who are yet to come online. There are parts of the UN system that are working really hard to provide people that right that they have to also be connected to the internet. But we've seen very often how, in the case of Myanmar, for example, people connected very quickly. If there is a government that is then controlling that information flow, they are then subjected to information that they don't know how to navigate, and it can be very dangerous. So we also, in the global principles, advocate for inclusive research, research that is across disciplines, languages, as well as thematic areas, but also in understudied places and communities, including in the global south. There is too little research, with lots of research in North America and in Europe, but very little in these parts of the world. And we're trying to, as the United Nations and through our offices around the world and through some other initiatives, including an organization called the IPIE, which is working to bring research from countries around the world so that we can really understand the information environment everywhere, and so that we can better help address it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean that I am from Nepal, and I now see everybody having access to social media, and they are also creating contents for social media for various reasons without knowing where the data is going, who is handling the data, and what kind of implications it is going to have. And then also I see that very much linked to the literacy, also like education level and literacy, especially of women, among women as well. So without understanding the danger of putting stuff out there or believing on things that's already in the internet, there are actions being taken, and there are no protection as such, and that puts them in a vulnerable situation. And we see a lot of violence against women and gender minority groups. So it has posed a lot of challenges all the way to the grassroots level and in every household and in every everyday life. So I have finished my questions, but we got a lot of questions from the audience, and I'd like to put some of those questions to you for you to respond. So there is one question about how can humanitarian organizations ensure information integrity in environments where government themselves are source of disinformation or censorship?
That's a very good question. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of our time. About 70% of the world's population lives under autocratic governments. And of course, autocratic governments, one of the first things they do is to control the media. And it is the challenge of, and probably the one of the biggest struggles is to be able to access information that is a right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is an opportunity with the internet. It's harder for governments to control the media and the message when there are ways to access information and to get around. There are still international broadcasts that are accessible in most countries in the world. But it is, of course, a challenge. And so I think harnessing the possibilities of our internet age, social media, the ability for people to get around censors, to get around blocks. I mean, some governments even go so far as to shut down the internet altogether in many cases, and mostly temporarily. But the UN is always advocating against this, advocating for the free flow of information in our global principles. And overall, we advocate for a free and independent media, that is supported, that can do their job, hold leaders to account, and where journalists are protected and not jailed. And that's all we can do, is to continue to advocate for that, and for more support for media development around the world, because even in places where the media isn't controlled or entirely controlled, independent journalists are struggling. The rise of social media has really disrupted the financial models of a lot of media organizations. Advertising went all over to social media, whereas the distribution on social media for media organizations has been very difficult. Many of them collapsed. There are news deserts all over the place, journalist extinction events. And so we've been calling for, and there is a global fund on public interest media that's based out of Paris that's doing great work. The UN has a lot of, some funding and some support for media development around the world and individual governments. But if we want to protect the facts, we need media and press freedom. And I think that's very similar to the struggle of academic freedom. And it's such an important pillar of democracy.
Thank you. There is another question, and this is about the role of religious leaders. So how do you view the role of religious leaders and faith-based activists in preventing the further erosion of international law and global institutions?
I guess it depends on the faith-based leader, but I think we hear a lot of very powerful voices in the faith-based community calling for human rights, protection of refugees and migrants, for tolerance among religions, for democracy. So I think, and even for protection of our environment. We're working, for example, in Indonesia with Muslim faith leaders who are not just advocating in their preaching that we need to protect our natural environment, but they're taking real environmental measures in their congregations, in their communities. So I think that they can have a very powerful, positive role. They're obviously communicators with big followers, and they're leveraging our digital platforms as well, and hopefully constructively.
Thank you. Thank you. So there is another question about the role of humanitarian organizations. So the question is, how can humanitarian organizations prevent the politicization of information while working in highly polarized or conflict-prone regions?
Stick to our principles, stick to our values, stick to the facts, and communicate in a human way. I think that that's one of the most effective ways for people for us to get through. I mean, for example, take Gaza now. International media are banned from entering Gaza. And so it is our humanitarians that have been really the source of information for most of the world. They are not necessarily communications people. They are, they are doctors working for, WHO, or they are just humanitarian actors working for the World Food Program, delivering food or running the bakeries. We get them on our, we link them to media who can interview them, and provide this kind of relatable and fundamentally factual source of information from one human to another, a human on the ground who is trying to help probably the most vulnerable people, some of the most vulnerable people on this earth right now, and communicating that through their own experience and from what they're seeing. It's very, very powerful, and it's very hard to distort and dispute if it is coming directly from somebody who is standing amidst the rubble, or standing in a hospital where people are lying on the floor, and you can see it with your own eyes. So that's some of the things that we are doing to try to ensure that what needs to be conveyed so that we can continue to support people and to help people is accurate.
Thank you so much. There is another question related to the earlier one about the role of faith. So there is a question that says, in a world where faith is international law and institution is rapidly eroding, how is the UN working to restore public trust and donor confidence, especially in an era where reputational attacks can go viral and significant impact on humanitarian funding?
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest challenge that we face right now. We are in a massive funding crisis at the United Nations, and particularly the organizations that depend on US funding and European funding. Most of the humanitarian organizations work on the basis of voluntary funding. And when a big donor decides to pull that funding or to make it conditional on meeting certain demands, or to have to, kind of prove your value and your worth, this is a big communications exercise, obviously. It is one where, for example, the US have a criteria. Does it make America safer, more secure, stronger? So there have been exercises to demonstrate that the work that humanitarians do in the field does have an impact on the safety and security and of countries all over the world. It's obviously supporting humanitarian action to help people in other countries is the right thing to do, we believe. And we believe that most populations who support humanitarian actors also, according to polling, support this kind of work. But how does that relate back home? And how can we demonstrate that there is a value in supporting people in some far off country, and that there, is an impact and could be a potential impact, where a war starts in some far off country, it sometimes can erupt and spread. It causes unrest. It causes people to leave, where vaccines are not provided anymore. It causes disease to spread. Disease knows no borders. So these kinds of arguments we're trying to make, but it is a struggle. We are fundamentally sticking to the values of the United Nations. We are not stepping down in any way on what we stand for, and we're still advocating for the people we serve. If that results in us not having as much money, at least we have the value of who we stand for, and we believe that perhaps we can find it from other sources.
Thank you. So there is one more question about so news agencies. So the question is, how has the UN engaged with news agencies, example Reuters or AFP and other media outlets, let's say from developing countries, regarding the way they write their text stories and present their audio-visual stories and features?
Mm-hmm. These agencies are absolutely critically important to engage with, especially the international news agencies. They have such a reach. Most news organizations around the world have a subscription to AP, Reuters, AFP, it depends, EFA, if you're Spanish speaking, and many others. If you engage with them, they write a story about you, it's likely that you're not just going to appear on their website, but it's going to appear in newspapers around the world. It's going to inform broadcast coverage, and it's extremely important. So we, for example, here in the United Nations, we have resident correspondents who report day in and day out on the United Nations. All of those news agencies are accredited here. We have a daily noon briefing where where our spokesperson provides information to them, answers their questions. Just one second. But we also proactively engage these news organizations and ask them, you have to reach out to them too. Sometimes they're busy, they're stretched, they're also facing funding crises. They may not necessarily come to you and cover you. So we're soliciting their coverage often. For example, if we release a report, we will make sure that we do a summary in the form of a press release. We will have a pre-briefing to bring in an expert and to walk through the report with them under embargo so that they have the opportunity to and the time to write their stories and then to put it out, when the embargo lifts. We offer them interviews with experts and other UN leaders. So it is absolutely essential to not just passively engage the press and be open and transparent when they ask questions and reach out to you, but also to proactively engage with them.
Thank you so much. We only have about 3 minutes left, and we got lots of excellent questions. So there is a question from Somalia, which you already have actually responded to, about the relevance and adoption of global principles in fragile states. So I will skip that question. But then I would like to ask this question because about AI. How can we not talk about AI in these days? So the question is, how can we ensure accurate information in the age of AI, where the risks of convincing and seemingly true misinformation is high? How do we empower our audience to sift through the noise?
Yeah, I think this must be a huge challenge for you who are teaching. It is a big concern for us that what is AI? What are the AI, generative AI, that so many people access for quick answers to their questions? Where is this AI getting its information? If it's scraping the internet is full of junk. And so we're very concerned when it's around science, when it's around history. There are many instances and cases and so many examples of AI hallucinating because it just wants to be authoritative and wants to be able to answer your question. With people busy just not really questioning or going to the source. We are concerned about search engines and the AI summaries they're providing, because while it is making it very convenient, they are no longer, not all some search engines are providing the link to the original source. But what many news organizations, which are very often the original source, are saying is that people are not taking the time to go to that original source. And sometimes the summary that it was provided is not entirely accurate. So there are a lot of concerns here. We're working and with AI actors and calling on them to do everything they can to ensure accuracy, also to compensate publishers, news organizations and collaborate and work with them for the content that they are using to train their AIs. And then finally, we all have to recognize that AI has been around for a while. So this whole discussion about social media and algorithms are AI, and they are trained in a certain way to amplify certain information, to downrank other kinds of information. They can use AI also to track information. They could use AI to make our information ecosystem healthier. I know a lot of social media companies do. There's a lot of horrible stuff that we don't see because they use AI to take down illegal content, but we do think that they could do better. It is, in our information age, it is a concern. And finally, I just would like to say that I think, and we think, that everyone should be taught media literacy in school. At universities, our older people need to be better educated. We don't want to leave it to individuals, though, to have to navigate, but a more informed society about how to work in this information environment is really critical for the health of our democracies, for the coming together around shared ideals and values, and just on consensus science. It is just really important that people understand how the information ecosystem functions, that they question when they see a piece of information that might make their heart palpitate. Who was the source? Where did it come from? How can I find out a little bit more, maybe an alternative source, to question?
Thank you so much. I said that was my final question, but I have a very brief 30-second question, if I may.
Sure.
So how can I, as a scholar and citizen, actively engage in fostering a healthier information ecosystem?
I think that it is fostering a healthy information ecosystem should be fundamental to the work of almost everyone who is working on an informed public. I think, universities, educators, academics, need to help us foster this information ecosystem. And that is also, of course, it means to try harder to get your publications seen, to maybe to educate your students better on how to do research in this environment that is as credible, that is fostering their own critical mindset. So I think factoring in being an academic in this information environment, learning how to also better compete. Unfortunately, it has to be part of the work. Maybe it is how to become a TikTok academic, and you might find certain circles. It is we do see this, people are hungry on social media platforms for experts and expertise to speak to them, not in the form of a 250-page report, but in the form of a kind of human dialogue. So maybe that's some inspiration.
Thank you so much. Thank you, USG, for a very insightful conversation today. We learned a lot, and there is a lot of takeaways for us. You summarized it very well in the end, that what each individual can do actually to mitigate the challenges that are presented in front of us. So thank you so much. So I would like to now, because of the time, I would like to thank everybody who joined today for their questions and engagement. We would like to especially thank you once again for your time and valuable insights. To everybody who shared their questions and reflections, thank you. While we weren't able to take and respond to all of the questions, we very much appreciated your thoughtful questions and remarks. So our special thank you to everybody who made this event possible. Special thanks to Goja and Gayatri and Kauri from the UNAI, and Mike, Sarah, Kate, Joel, and Hannah, and all of the team members from the ISA virtual team, virtual programming team. Thank you so much. And we hope the session leaves us with lots of insights and ideas. And maybe this is the beginning of the conversation on information integrity. So the recording will be available on ISA YouTube channel. So on behalf of the organizing team, thank you so much. And we'll end this webinar here. Thank you, everybody.